That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Cactus Pears, the directorial debut of Rohan Kanawade, which premiered January 26th, 2025 at the Sundance Film Festival in the World Cinema Dramatic Competition.
Directorial debut. That's impressive.
Apparently also semi-autobiographical.
Wow.
Which I think makes sense.
Sure. What is Cactus Pears about? Anand, a 30-something city dweller compelled to spend a 10-day mourning period for his father in the rugged countryside of Western India, tenderly bonds with a local farmer struggling to stay unmarried. What is your pull quote?
A quiet, often profound queer melodrama about getting out of one's own way, Cactus Pears is a surprisingly sensual odyssey between two men who decide to pursue the lives they desire.
Mine. This beautifully unfussy story breathes new life into a familiar narrative. What did I like about the film? The cinematography is beautiful.
Vikas Urs is the director of photography.
I like the performances from everyone, but I think the two leads do a fine job.
Yes, and it's their first film.
Wow.
Along with the actor playing the mother.
Wow. I also liked her.
I did too.
But the story is pretty simple. So it's modern day India, and Anand is this 30-something that they keep, he's 30, and they keep telling us that. But he lives in Mumbai, the big city, but he's from a very small town, like a village. And we see that his father has just died, and the tradition is that they spend this 10-day mourning period. So everyone goes back to the village. Anand is reluctant. Initially, he's like, well, can I go for the first 2 days and then I'll return for the last day?
His mom
was like, boy, you better get your ass over here.
Well, no, she says, don't bother at all then.
She gets mad, and then the next scene is him on the bus with her. It's clear before Anand even gets to the village that he's gay. When he gets there, he meets an old friend, Balya. And it's also clear that they grew up together and they probably had an intimate relationship or experimented.
Lovers.
Yeah. So for a big portion of the film, it's Anand back home, his family pressing him about when he's going to find a girl to get married to. Balya is also having the same issue. His parents are trying to marry him off. They're reconnecting, but it's not until like the 70-minute mark that we see them actually become intimate. And that amounts to them kissing. And then we immediately cut to them both naked on the ground. And then things take a turn because Balya gets into a fight with his parents because they are insisting that he marry this young lady. And
Which is a rare opportunity because of the economic reality of his family. They don't have a farm anymore. He makes he makes his life selling milk. So it's like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity at this point. Well,
yes, that's right, because he's not a very compelling package, despite he is a handsome man, but he's not a very compelling package financially. And there's a shortage of women. So the women have their, pick of the litter. So like you said, his family is really bewildered why he wouldn't take this opportunity. And then he sort of gets it in his head that he can move to Mumbai with Anand. So he tells his parents that. And then, of course, his parents tell Anand's family. And it's a small village, so everyone's talking. And it gets back to Anand like, oh, you're going to bring Balya back with you? What's that going to look like? Your apartment's so small. How are you going to find a girl when you have this man laid up in there? And then he basically reveals that he's gay in so many words.
Yeah, there's this kind of coding about the language of skirting around. It's a very circuitous way to say he might stay.
And we'll get back to this because I think this is the most powerful message of the film. But his family kind of just goes like, okay. I mean, you just need to tell us. Like, it's not a big deal. So then we see him go back to Mumbai with Balya. And as soon as they get into Anand's apartment, Anand starts crying thinking about his dad. And he had a very loving relationship with his dad. And he has one with his mother, which we'll get to. But Balya comforts him, and then we see them fall asleep, and the movie ends. I thought it was beautiful. It's not overly dramatic. There aren't a lot of peaks and lows. It's just pretty consistent, which I think makes sense for what the story is trying to say.
Yes, and I think that's what my comment was about. This makes sense to me that this is semi-autobiographical because it feels very authentic, and of course there's some universality to it but despite the specificities of the culture.
The main message I took from this story is how, and you mentioned it in your pull quote, but basically how we can get in our own way. Like our inability to communicate our concerns are fueling this fear that is non-existent, because we find out later in the film that Anand's mom knows he's gay. She tells his ass, like, I knew you were gay, but we didn't even need to know that because...
She said, I knew you were gay before your father felt he had to explain it to me.
And then we already... Right, because we find out that Anand's dad knew he was gay and accepted him and actually was quite supportive, because Anand was in a relationship with a man and then it ended.
Because that other man got married to a woman.
And Anand's dad felt for him. So clearly his parents were very loving, very accepting. Initially, his mom, the reason we can assume Anand is gay right away is because the mom goes, okay, when we get there, just tell everyone that you're still heartbroken over your last girlfriend. So that's why you're not trying to get married. And so obviously it's like, oh, she's trying to find excuses.
And he goes, I don't want to give anybody any false hopes.
So then that's when I really knew, not only is he gay, but his mom knows.
And it's not just about getting in one's own way and kind of navigating life out of fear about what's going to happen if you come out of the closet. It's also that puts you in a state of arrested development, I think, mentally, romantically, and you accept the love that you think you deserve. And I think that's even more so the case in a culture where you can't have a recognized public relationship. So it's interesting how Balya and Anand, while they're urban and rural settings, they both have a really isolated kind of despondent, they aren't able to be romantic, but they are having sex with people. Right,
because we see that Anand seems to be like in some sort of relationship with a man who is...
Well, his WhatsApp has it looks like his wife and his child are in his profile picture.
The man he's messaging appears to be married with a child to a woman, so it's like, oh, is he dealing with some down low man? And so he's obviously probably not getting what he wants from this man. And then Balya in this small village is getting it in. Like he says, like, yeah, most of the guys, they just want to hit it and quit it. And then we see a moment where
this man pulls up on a motorbike. The family knows who that man is, and he's like, hey, come on, let's go. I came a long way to come here.
So we'll get back to that point, but I just want to start going through my notes. So this 10-day mourning, ritual is pretty strict, because we're told like they can only eat certain types of food only twice a day. They can't have snacks unless it's this. They cannot wear shoes. They're not. But then I think it's funny because they also say like, well, you're not supposed to wash your hair. Well, the men can wash their hair, not the women. I thought that was important because it made it seem like they're holding on to the vestiges of this tradition that maybe the younger people, it's like it's starting to erode. Yes. Well, and he's completely removed himself from this lifestyle. And then he's wearing a gray shirt, which they're very concerned about because you're not supposed to wear black, and he has to keep defending that. Well, we hear several times like you have to be barefoot. But then every time we see Anand with Balya by themselves out wandering, he's wearing slippers. And then we also see, oh gosh, I think the cinematography of them in this village is really beautiful. But we see a moment where Anand is told, like, come help. And he has to pick, because the father's cremated, and he has to go pick the hot bones out of the ashes. That was a powerful image. We also see that one of the elder women sets out like this plate and covers it by a candle. And then later on, she retrieves the plate, and I couldn't tell. It looked like a plate of flour. Yeah, it was because they're trying to, based on their beliefs, what the dead father has been reincarnated as, based on what they can tell has visited the plate, and they see bird tracks. Right. I thought that was really interesting. That's interesting because that also relates to kind of what happens on the 10th day where they set out this food, and when the crows come to pick at this rice that they prepared, they're like, oh, his soul has moved on. But getting back to how his inability to be open with his family has created this block for him. And like you said, like this inability to evolve. But I do think it's curious because sometimes I think everyone can relate to family. Like sometimes we avoid family because they are pressing and nosy and inconsiderate. And it comes from what they think, and I believe comes from a place of like concern. But then I think sometimes, especially as queer people, we write off our families like...
Well, how they measure success. Like you have a wife, a kid, and a career, and it's like, but that is not what I see for myself.
But we have to also understand if that's their only barometer, it's like you have to educate them. And Anand has not done that.
In a very limited way.
And so I was really pleased when he finally does say, like, this is not what I want to do, and then makes it clear that he's going to move with this other guy, that his family takes it in stride, almost like, that's great too, fool, you just need to tell us something, like you're just adrift. And I think a lot of queer people, their families show concern because maybe, like I know a lot of people who, if you get to know them, it's like they do have a rich life and they do have a lot of interests and they are successful in how they measure it. But what they present to the outside world, it would come across as like, oh, you seem lonely.
Yeah, you have no one to turn to support you.
So you have to kind of explain to people, like, actually, I feel pretty fulfilled. I feel successful. I do things I enjoy. You don't need to worry about me. That's the message I got from this film, is that Anand is responsible for helping his family understand if he cares about them caring for him.
And I think, to me, there's not a ton of queer representation in Indian cinema, much less independent Indian cinema. And I think we've seen kind of an uptick in that. But in art house, festival anointed cinema, there's still something about this that feels kind of like a big deal, because when I think of auteur Indian cinema that's queer, like Deepa Mehta's Fire is kind of almost a standalone at that kind of level that's, listed on international lists of films of that nature.
I really, initially when we meet the mom, it seems like she might be a problem, but then very quickly we realize she loves her son, she supports him, she's just trying to balance her extended family and trying to protect her son from these questions she knows will upset him. And then we get her at another moment trying to come up with a story as to why he's not getting married. Again, trying to protect him. But I think the juxtaposition of the mom trying to do that for her son, and then we get a moment where Anand and his mom go to visit her dad, so his grandfather, who's this blind man who can't walk. And then he wants to tell the story of how he introduced Anand's mother to Anand's father. And kind of tells a similar story to, it's all very connected, right? Because he's saying she was illiterate, she's not a city girl, and she had this opportunity to marry a city guy. So he really wanted that for
Because
her.
Anand's father was initially interested in her younger sister. And what happens then is it makes it seem like there's something wrong with the older sister. So Suman is her name. So she would have a difficult time. So he's trying to convince Anand's father to take her, and he was because of her cooking. And I think that sustenance and what we can provide people is also a metaphor that's built into the title about the cactus pears.
Well, and as a whole, food is a big plot point throughout the film. But I do think it's interesting because what they're trying to do for Anand, for Balya, is what they've done for everyone else. So while they interpret that as like it doesn't feel inclusive or it bothers them, it's like it actually is them showing that they want for you. Am I explaining it properly? That the family is trying to give you what they had, so in a way that is parody for them.
Yes.
So I really like that scene with the grandfather.
I like both. There's two conversations with the mother that I think are pretty powerful.
Well, the other one.
Well, the first one, when they're kind of talking about how dad, that's when we learn how, dad was very comforting to him when his lover got married, and his mother's asking him some very, kind of subtle questions, but she's like, oh, I wish you would talk to me more.
And then he
puts his head in her lap.
Yeah, that was really sweet.
And then later on, there's another similar conversation towards the end where she's comforting him because from his uncle told him, like, your dad wanted you to get married. And that triggers him. And he goes and cries because it was his understanding that his dad was fine with him and his mother's comforting him. And he's like, I wanted to tell everybody, he doesn't say that I'm gay, but I wanted to tell everybody, but I was afraid how they would treat you once I leave.
Right. Again, I think that just demonstrates the importance of giving people a chance. Like, oftentimes people feel so alone, and it's like, well, you're not giving people a chance to show you that they can be there for you. And I thought the character of the mother,
she's like, don't worry
did
about
a fine
them.
job.
And he goes, do you worry about me? And she said, no. And I think those were things that he needed to hear. And, like we all avoid kind of those conversations because they are uncomfortable. And we are afraid that we might get, more often than not, this is a story of abandonment and rejection in the queer community. And even despite what year it is. But I think that you can't help how other people are going to be. You have to be yourself.
I did think a funny moment is after they're out in the forest or wherever they are, and then they are intimate, and then we see them laying butt naked in the dirt. And then immediately the next scene is Anand has brought Balya shampoo to wash his hair. I thought that was funny. It's
funny. And again, like I said, they talk in coded language, but they talk about special friends. Do you have any special friends in Mumbai? And I think it's Anand who says special friends never last there.
Yeah. Well, here, I want to circle back to that, but my last note is that we see right before Anand goes back to Mumbai with Balya, he's in a chapel, and then he has a vision of his father. And he's able to actually hug his father. I thought that was really sweet.
The power of goodbye, yes.
Yeah, and they also have the 10th day ceremony, which is they shave Anand's head, and then they make this presentation of rice, and they believe that if the crows come to eat the rice, then the dead loved one's soul is at peace. I thought that was lovely. But yeah, the final moment in Anand's apartment with him crying and being comforted by Balya, I thought was a really nice end to the story.
Well, but I'm like, that bed is too small for two bodies. So yes,
they're on the floor.
They have to make use of the floor. But it's a very tender, intimate kind of love story.
It is. I do think that it lingers for a bit, and I don't mind that. But I do think that for the runtime, I would have liked a little more context for what Anand's life was like in Mumbai. Because, I mean, you've articulated probably what it was like with him not being able to make connections. They do include that, so it's not a complete mystery. But I think I was craving just a little bit more about Anand and how big city life might compare to what Balya is experiencing in this village. But otherwise, I think very well done.
And taking what you can get, and also probably not, it is difficult to articulate whether you're in a small town or a big city, that you're really probably part of you might be looking for more than a connection than just what is being offered to you as readily accessible. But again, it's leaning into that discomfort because, more often than not, you might not get the reaction you receive. But you're never going to get what you want unless you put it out there.
What would you give Cactus Pears?
3.5.
I think it's very good. I would give it 3.5 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.